What is balance exactly in the context of spirituality and self mastery? It is the coming back to center, the inability to be knocked off of your feet, and to hold challenging positions without being toppled over. And balance is part of the self mastery journey on the Ascension process that a lot of people struggle with. And they struggle with it in a variety of different ways. The first is that when we are dedicated to a practice, dedicated to a path, a goal, and we encounter resistance or frustration, like for example, I had this goal of shifting, using reality shifting and quantum shifting into a world that was like a heaven on earth. This is before I was on TikTok and social media where people were talking about a new earth. This is like I went offline for a bit during parts of my journey and awakened by myself and with my guides and the other realms. And I wasn't completely alone, but you understand what I mean. And I had this vision that humanity was at this cusp of a transition point that would catapult itself either into an epic failure or into this amazing afterlife. Not really utopia, it's not so black and white, but it felt like an inflection point in the destiny of mankind. And that if there was a critical mass of awakening, then we would be building a road to a future that was a practical heaven on earth, not like what you read about in the biblical sense or what is idealized in the afterlife experience. And you wouldn't have to die to get there. That just kind of seems really upsetting. Why ruin a good thing? And you could transition there using interdimensional travel. And when I envisioned this, I envisioned that there was some really amazing human technologies. And I started getting a glimpse of these timelines, and they felt very present. The potentials felt very active and present, but it felt as though that humanity had to decide, and that there were forces outside of most people's awareness that were trying to effectively drive our species into extinction. And then I emerged out of that spiritual awakening. I became more grounded, skipping over a lot of details, of course. Now, in the present day reality that I'm in, continuously confronted with data that makes me think, I think we're going extinct. I really, when you learn about what's been going on with our food and the chemicals and the water, and it's pretty crazy. And then you hear about oppression and censorship, and it's very easy to get knocked off balance. And when you have gotten a taste of another world and you know that it exists out in the ether and that we live in a multiverse, all you have to do is just hit the right levers, a certain order, and meditate enough and say enough mantras and spin around 3 times, and your manifestations aren't working because it's a mindset issue. So you dedicate yourself to this process of escaping this ever present reality, which seems to be confronting us every single day. And the actions of those that have come before us have really stripped away any nonsensical naivete, at least that I used to have, which was I just assumed that if you bought a product like feminine products, that they were safe and not loaded with heavy metals, toxic chemicals, and the most sensitive nether regions of a woman's body. Similarly, I just assumed that if you purchased diapers and wipes, that you would have no worries because these would be rigorously vetted because we care about our children. And as we find out, endocrine disrupting molecules are so embedded in these products. We swim in pollution. We bathe ourselves in pollution. We spritz ourselves with phthalates, pollution. We shampoo and condition our hair with toxic chemicals that actually make things worse. We consume things that are never meant to be consumed, that are byproducts of industrial waste. It's remarkable. When you look at this collectively, it's really hard to keep your balance, right? I'm speaking to you from my mind here. I'm not channeling right now, as I sometimes do. This is what has been perplexing me, because to have this insight that there are other worlds and to interface with those other worlds as myself and others have done, and then to realize that we're on a sinking ship. It is like being on the Titanic, realizing that incredulously somebody is sinking the ship because there are like a couple of people on board that are going to oppose the congregation and the Federal Reserve, which is going to set off this series and chain of events, of actions that would lead to potential world domination and human misery for all, as well as potentially open up avenues to some of the worst black markets of human suffering that we've ever seen and ever not witnessed. Never mind the underground bases where other worldly beings are being held captive and tortured, and human farms where people are forced to have babies, whether or not they want to. It's madness out there. And when you summarize it all like that, if you're not familiar with it, by God, just pretend I never said the things that I said, because it's just a head scratcher. Because we realize that this world that we exist in, with our idealistic narratives and the mainstream belief that many of us used to have, we realize how futile everything is. And then we're asking ourselves, why the F are we here? Really? Why did we get on the Titanic right before it was going to implode on itself? In actuality, I do believe that there are options, but this episode is about balance. So in the face of things that want to energetically harvest you, capsize you, or very difficult truths, seemingly nonsensical, fictitious things, until you start to look at the evidence, which may or may not be partially fabricated. When you start to sample holistically, it's hard not to feel frightened by what is happening. And when you realize the degree of cover-up, DuPont is just one example out of many, you start to realize that we're here because we have to learn from our mistakes. We can't go and make a new world until we realize how it's been messed up in the first place. We can't go and create something new without understanding deeply where the problems lie and where the lies have buried them. And so I believe that many of us have to witness some really tragic truths come to light because we need to understand, if we're going to move forward, how to actually do it differently. And for example, if we keep becoming friends with wolves in sheep's clothing and not creating the systems and the checks and balances that enable us to wisely consider long-term impacts to our children's children's children. And we just put people in charge who are motivated by worldly pleasures, and obsessively so at times, with no regard for their contribution to the collective, no regard for the environment, no regard for suffering or pain, then obviously we've done something wrong. Because how do we get to this level of awakening to realize that it's still unfashionable to be wealthy and spiritual, although this is changing? But there's been this reoccurring belief that if you have gifts, if you're spiritual, then you shouldn't charge for them. And a lot of people struggle with this, and they struggle charging for their value. They have a hard time valuing themselves. And then not everybody, right? It's this own process to break out of, but you know who has no problem valuing themselves? Greedy mofos. And you know who has no problem saying no and locking people out? Greedy mofos. Capitalist people. The people who have built our infrastructure are not Mother Teresa types. They're not, we're going to love everybody and forgive everybody. They've been aggressive and pointed and get things done at the expense of rules and sometimes knowledge or research. And there have been casualties along the way. But there's also been incredible feats of infrastructure. And so there's almost this push for innovation and push for creation that almost pre-selects for those with a certain inclination. And these people, traditionally in the past, have probably not been in the jungles of Peru doing ayahuasca and having massive levels of awakening. Now we see a shift and a change. But traditionally in the past, these have been very, very clear-cut minded people that have been solely focused on a goal. The original Rockefeller was so obsessed with money and business, literally, that he focused and devoted his entire life to building a fortune and creating infrastructures that he cared about in society, stamping out the competition, revolutionizing business practices, organizing in very, very important ways that would leave a long-lasting legacy, from health to education to medicine to science to many, many facets of our present-day world. This was somebody that was driven, bold, not afraid of saying no, not afraid of saying F you. not afraid of protecting their fortune, their livelihood, their credibility. And there's something about modern day spirituality and many tenets that make us very soft bellied, that make it easy for us to say, oh, you're right. Yeah, I shouldn't have any boundaries. You should be able to treat me exactly however you want. I'll apologize, and I'm going to unconditionally love you. I'm not going to hold you accountable for your BS. And so if we realize that we've gotten here because we have allowed certain figureheads to emerge as winning competitors, and we have allowed the separation between religion and the state, and the sort of indoctrination of something's wrong with you if you're spiritual and religious and you want wealth or fame or glory or whatever the people who are building the infrastructure are going after. Power, influence, domination. There's something wrong with you. If you want to also be a capitalist, you can't do both. Thankfully, we are overcoming this. But this compartmentalization, of course, when you zoom all the way out, holistically speaking, is going to create an ineptitude, an impotence in people who would otherwise be awake and driven and spiritual and competitors. People who can organize and get things done and have clear boundaries and roadmaps. People that know how to organize funds from conscious people. And I know that they exist. I have personally witnessed it. I believe that they're in the minority still, and that we need to shift that balance to the majority. Because if we really want to get to this new earth, if we really want to see technology used in socially conscious and ethical ways, even we take out technology, if we want to survive and have our children be thriving, like I just heard that the CDC, and I haven't personally vetted this, so do your own research, is rolling back some of the milestones because apparently we're not getting smarter. And apparently our average child is lagging way behind than we've ever been before. If we want to succeed, then we have to stay balanced with our conviction and determination.